The crowd wanted blood, and they wanted it from her. In the heart of winter, a 19-year-old girl sat bound to a wooden chair in the center of Raven Hollow's frozen town square, accused, humiliated, and abandoned by everyone she'd ever known. They called her thief. They called her burden. They called for punishment without mercy. But when the mob's cruelty reached its breaking point, a silent figure emerged from the shadows, a man who hadn't spoken to the town in years. What he did next would ignite a chain of events that would shake the mountain and test the limits of human decency. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The cold was the first thing Lila Morton noticed when she woke that morning. Not the gentle cold of autumn's last breath, but the bone-deep, merciless cold of a winter that had come early and meant to stay. It crept through the gaps in the walls of the tiny room she rented above the butcher's shop, through the thin blanket she pulled tight around her shoulders, through the very air she breathed until her lungs ached with each inhalation. She lay still for a moment, watching her breath form clouds in the dim pre-dawn light, and wondered, as she had wondered every morning for the past 3 months, whether today would be the day everything fell apart. The answer came sooner than she expected. By the time the sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge, Lila found herself being dragged through the muddy streets of Raven Hollow by 2 men she'd known her entire life. Samuel Brennan, the blacksmith's son, gripped her left arm with fingers like iron bands. On her right, Deputy Martin Coyle, a man who'd once courted her older sister before the fever took her, held her elbow with a gentleness that somehow felt more threatening than Samuel's brutality. "Please," she gasped, her boots skidding in the half-frozen slush. "Please, there's been a mistake." "Shut your mouth," Samuel snarled, jerking her forward so hard she nearly fell. "Should have thought about mistakes before you decided to steal from hard-working folk." "I didn't steal anything." But her protest dissolved into the morning air, ignored by the 2 men and by the growing crowd of townspeople who emerged from their homes and shops to watch the spectacle. Lila saw their faces, faces she'd known since childhood, faces that had watched her grow from a chubby, awkward child into a chubby, awkward young woman who'd never quite found her place in Raven Hollow's rigid social order. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood in her doorway, arms crossed over her apron chest, her thin lips pressed into a line of righteous disapproval. The Miller twins, barely 14, pointed and whispered behind their hands, their eyes bright with the cruel excitement of the young and thoughtless. Even Father Morrison, the town's aging priest, watched from the steps of his small church with an expression that held more judgment than compassion. They brought her to the town square, that open space at Raven Hollow's heart, where announcements were made, celebrations held, and on rare, dark occasions, public punishments administered. Someone had already placed a wooden chair in the center of the square, its legs sunk into the muddy snow, waiting. "No," Lila breathed, true fear finally cutting through her confusion. "No, please, you can't." But they could, and they did. Samuel forced her into the chair while Deputy Coyle produced a length of rough rope from his coat. They bound her wrists to the chair's arms, her ankles to its legs, pulling the knots tight enough to bite into her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. The cold immediately began to seep through her clothing, and she couldn't stop the violent shiver that ran through her body. The crowd had grown. It seemed like half the town had turned out, drawn by the promise of drama, of spectacle, of someone else's suffering to distract from their own hard lives. They formed a loose circle around her, close enough that she could see the expressions on their faces, hear their muttered comments. "Always knew she'd come to no good. Lazy thing, never did an honest day's work. Look at the size of her. No wonder she was stealing food." That last comment drew a ripple of laughter, and Lila felt her cheeks burn despite the cold. She'd always been heavier than the other girls in town, her body soft and round where theirs were lean and angular from hard work and sparse meals. It had been a source of shame her entire life, a visible mark of her unworthiness in a community that valued toughness and endurance above all else. "Silence!" The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade through butter. Mayor Douglas Wickham strode into the square, his considerable belly preceding him, his fur-trimmed coat marking him as the wealthiest man in Raven Hollow. He positioned himself in front of Lila's chair, turning to address the assembled townspeople with the practiced ease of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. Citizens of Raven Hollow, he began, his breath forming great clouds in the frigid air. We are gathered here this morning to witness justice. Justice for a crime that strikes at the very heart of our community's survival. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Mayor Wickham, please, I don't know what... The accused will remain silent. Wickham's jowls quivered with indignation. He turned back to the crowd, raising his voice. Last night, someone broke into the grain storage behind the livery stable. They stole nearly half a barrel of grain that was set aside to feed our horses and livestock through the winter, grain that we cannot replace until spring. A murmur of genuine anger rippled through the crowd. Lila felt it like a physical force, pressing against her from all sides. That grain was spoiled, she cried out, unable to contain herself. It was moldy and rotten. I saw Thomas Wells throwing it out last week because it wasn't fit even for the pigs. Lies. Wickham's face flushed purple. Thomas Wells discovered the theft this morning and found grain scattered along the path leading directly to the butcher's shop, where this girl has been living above the premises for the past 4 months. I never touched that grain. Why would I steal spoiled feed? Because you're desperate and stupid, someone in the crowd shouted. Probably ate it yourself. More laughter, crueler this time. Lila blinked back tears, refusing to let them see her cry. Mayor Wickham held up his hand for silence. The evidence is clear. The grain trail leads to her dwelling. She has no alibi for last night. The butcher confirms he heard nothing from the room above, meaning she wasn't there. And look at her. He gestured at Lila with barely concealed disgust. She's clearly been eating well enough while the rest of us tighten our belts for winter. The crowd's mood shifted then, hardening into something ugly. Lila had seen it before, this transformation that turned neighbors into strangers, turned ordinary people into a mob hungry for someone to blame, someone to punish. She's a burden. Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice rose above the others. Been nothing but a burden since her parents died and left her with nothing. No skills, no prospects, eating her way through other people's charity. I work, Lila protested, her voice breaking. I work at the laundry 3 days a week. I help Mrs. Patterson with her. Scrubbing a few shirts doesn't entitle you to steal from the community, Wickham interrupted. The council has deliberated. When? Lila demanded, anger finally cutting through her fear. When did the council deliberate? I haven't been charged with anything. I haven't had a chance to defend myself or call witnesses or... This isn't Boston, girl, Deputy Coyle said quietly, almost apologetically. We don't have time for fancy trials. Winter's here. Resources are scarce. When someone steals from the community, we handle it quickly. I didn't steal anything. But her words were lost in the rising voices of the crowd. Someone threw a clump of frozen mud that struck her shoulder, exploding into icy fragments. Then another, and another. Lila hunched in the chair, unable to shield herself, unable to do anything but endure. Enough! Wickham's voice boomed across the square. The projectile stopped, though the crowd's hostility remained palpable. The council's decision is this. Lila Morton will remain bound in this square for 3 days and 3 nights as an example to anyone else who might consider stealing from their neighbors. She will be given water but no food. Perhaps hunger will teach her to respect the property of others. At the end of 3 days, she will be released and given until sunset to leave Raven Hollow permanently. Anyone who aids her in any way will face similar punishment. 3 days, 3 nights. In this cold. The reality of it hit Lila like a physical blow. She wouldn't survive 3 days exposed to the elements. The temperature would drop below freezing tonight, and it would only get colder. They weren't just punishing her, they were killing her, slowly, publicly, and calling it justice. You can't do this, she whispered, but the fight had drained out of her voice. I'll die. Should have thought of that before, someone called out. Wickham turned away from her, already moving on to other business. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded, their righteousness satisfied. Within minutes, the square had emptied until only a handful of stragglers remained, watching Lila with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. The hours that followed were among the longest of Lila's life. The sun climbed higher but brought no warmth. The cold seeped deeper into her bones, and she couldn't stop shivering. Her wrists and ankles grew raw where the ropes chafed against her skin. People passed through the square going about their daily business, most ignoring her completely, a few pausing to stare or make comments. Around midday, the Miller twins returned with a small group of other children. They formed a semicircle in front of her chair, their young faces bright with malicious curiosity. "Is it true you ate a whole barrel of grain by yourself?" the smaller twin asked. "No," Lila said quietly. "I didn't take any grain." "Liar," the older twin said. "Our pa says you're a thief and a liar, and we shouldn't talk to you." "Then why are you here?" The question seemed to stump them for a moment. Then the smaller one smiled, showing a gap where he'd lost a tooth. "To see what happens to bad people." They stayed for nearly an hour, taking turns asking questions designed to humiliate, throwing small pebbles when they thought no adults were watching, mimicking her voice when she asked them to stop. Lila eventually stopped responding, stopped reacting, until the children grew bored and wandered away in search of more entertaining diversions. The afternoon brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, heavy with the promise of snow. The temperature dropped further, and Lila's shivering became violent, uncontrollable tremors that shook the chair beneath her. Her fingers had gone numb, then her toes, and now a deep, aching cold was spreading through her limbs toward her core. She found herself drifting, her thoughts becoming sluggish and confused. Images from her childhood flickered through her mind: her mother's warm kitchen, the smell of bread baking, her father's rare laughter. They'd been poor but loving, and when the influenza took them both within a week of each other, Lila had been left alone at 15 with nothing but a few possessions and the threadbare kindness of neighbors who had their own families to worry about. She'd tried. She'd tried so hard to make a place for herself in Raven Hollow, to be useful, to be liked, but she'd always been different, too soft, too heavy, too quiet, too much of a burden. And now, at 19, she was going to die alone in this town square, convicted of a crime she didn't commit, mourned by no one. The first snowflakes began to fall as the sun touched the western ridge, large, fat flakes that drifted down like silent accusations, settling on her hair, her shoulders, the ropes that bound her. The square was empty now, everyone retreating to their warm homes and hot meals. Lila closed her eyes and tried to remember what warmth felt like. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't sense the presence until a shadow fell across her, blocking out what little light remained. Lila's eyes fluttered open. At first she thought she was hallucinating, the cold playing tricks on her failing mind, but the figure standing before her was solid, real, steam rising from his breath in the frozen air. He was tall. That was her first clear thought, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat made of dark fur. His face was weathered and lean, with a thick beard shot through with gray despite his relative youth. She guessed he couldn't be much past 30, but it was his eyes that captured her attention. Gray as winter sky, and completely unreadable. She'd seen him before, though always from a distance. Everyone in Raven Hollow knew of Caleb Ward, the mountain trapper who came to town perhaps twice a year to trade pelts and buy supplies. He never spoke to anyone beyond what was absolutely necessary for commerce, never participated in town gatherings, never stayed longer than a few hours before disappearing back into the wilderness. Rumors swirled around him like smoke. Some said he'd been a soldier before he came to the mountains. Others claimed he'd killed a man in a duel back east. A few whispered that he'd gone half mad with isolation, that he talked to ghosts in his cabin high above the tree line. Whatever the truth, Caleb Ward had made it clear through his silence and his absence that he wanted nothing to do with Raven Hollow or its people. So why was he standing here now, staring at her with those unreadable eyes? "Please," Lila whispered, her voice cracking. "Water?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, taking in the scene, the chair, the ropes, the girl shivering violently in the falling snow. His jaw tightened, the only sign of any emotion crossing his stony features. Then he turned and walked away. Lila watched him go, feeling something inside her break. Even the hermit trapper, a man who shunned all human contact, couldn't be bothered to show her a moment's kindness. She was truly alone. The snow fell harder, the darkness deepened. Lila's shivering began to slow, and some distant part of her mind recognized this as a bad sign. She was too cold to shiver now, too cold to feel much of anything except a creeping numbness that felt almost peaceful. She didn't know how much time had passed when she heard voices approaching. Multiple voices, angry and slurred with drink. Her heart sank as she recognized them, Samuel Brennan and 3 of his friends, young men who worked in the mill and spent their wages on cheap whiskey. "There she is," Samuel announced, gesturing grandly as they stumbled into the square. "Ravenhollow's own grain thief, getting what she deserves." The others laughed, forming a rough circle around her chair. Lila could smell the alcohol on them, could see the mean glitter in their eyes that spoke of men looking for entertainment and too drunk to care about consequences. "You know what I think?" one of them said. Peter Darrow, she recognized, the Sawyer's apprentice. "I think she's too comfortable. 3 days in a chair? That ain't real punishment." "What do you suggest?" Samuel asked, though his grin suggested he already knew the answer. "Well, it's mighty cold out. Bet she'd feel it more without that dress keeping her warm." Lila's blood turned to ice in her veins. "No, please, don't—" "Shut up," Samuel said casually, and backhanded her across the face. Her head snapped to the side, stars exploding across her vision. She tasted blood. Peter moved forward, reaching for the collar of her dress. Lila screamed, a raw sound of pure terror that echoed across the empty square. She thrashed against the ropes, feeling them cut deeper into her wrists, not caring, desperate to get away. "Step back!" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Quiet. Calm. Absolutely inflexible. Samuel and his friends froze. Turned. Caleb Ward had returned. He stood at the edge of the square, still as stone, his right hand resting on the long knife at his belt. In his left hand he carried a thick wool blanket. "This ain't your business, Ward," Samuel said, trying to inject authority into his voice and failing. There was something in the trapper's eyes that sobered him faster than coffee ever could. "Step back." Caleb repeated the words in exactly the same tone, but somehow they carried more weight the second time. "You threatening us?" Peter demanded, though he'd already moved away from Lila's chair. "There's 4 of us, and 1 of you." Caleb's expression didn't change. 4 drunk boys who can barely stand against 1 sober man whose gutted animal's bigger and meaner than all of you combined. Those odds don't favor you the way you think they do. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Lila held her breath, waiting for violence to explode, for blood to stain the snow. Then Samuel spat in the dirt. "She ain't worth it," he muttered. "Come on, boys, let the crazy hermit have his fun." They retreated with as much dignity as their drunken state allowed, throwing insults over their shoulders but not daring to look back. Within moments, they disappeared into the darkness, their voices fading into the night. Caleb watched them go until even their footsteps had vanished. Then he turned to Lila and moved forward with swift, economical movements. He pulled a knife from his belt, not the hunting knife but a smaller, sharper blade, and knelt beside the chair. "Hold still," he said quietly. The rope binding her right wrist parted with a single stroke. Then her left. Her ankles. Suddenly she was free, but her limbs were so numb and stiff that she couldn't move, couldn't stand, could barely comprehend what was happening. Caleb sheathed the knife and unfolded the blanket. He draped it around her shoulders, tucking it carefully around her body. The wool was thick and warm, and Lila felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple kindness of it. "Can you walk?" he asked. Lila tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, his arms solid and steady. Without a word, he swept her up, cradling her against his chest as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Lila expected shame at being carried, at having her weight lifted by this stranger. But the shame didn't come. There was only relief and warmth and the overwhelming sense that something fundamental had just shifted in the course of her life. "Wait," she managed to say as he began walking. "The mayor... he'll punish you for this. He'll... don't care." 2 words. Flat. Final. They were halfway across the square when Mayor Wickham's voice rang out across the darkness. "Ward! Caleb Ward! You stop right there!" Caleb's stride didn't falter, didn't even slow. Wickham emerged from the shadows of the town hall, Deputy Coyle at his side. The mayor's face was flushed with anger and authority. "That girl is serving a sentence handed down by the town council. You have no right to interfere with justice." Now Caleb stopped, turned. looked at the mayor with those flat gray eyes that revealed nothing and promised everything. "Justice," he said, and the word dripped with contempt. "You tied a girl to a chair in freezing weather for 3 days over spoiled grain that wasn't worth feeding to rats. If that's your justice, I want no part of it. She's a thief. You have proof?" Caleb's voice remained level, almost conversational. "Physical evidence? A witness who saw her take it? Or just some grain scattered on the ground that anyone could have planted to frame a girl nobody likes?" Wickham's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. The council decided to kill her slow and call it righteousness. "I'm saving you from being murderers. You should thank me." "If you leave this town with her, you're banished," Wickham sputtered. "You'll never trade here again. You'll have no access to supplies, no—" "I came to Raven Hollow twice a year out of convenience, not necessity," Caleb interrupted. "There are other towns, better towns, towns where people don't get entertainment from watching a girl freeze to death." He adjusted Lila in his arms, making sure the blanket covered her completely. "We're leaving now. Anyone tries to stop us, they'll regret it. Anyone follows us into the mountains, they won't come back." The quiet certainty in his voice made it clear this wasn't a threat or a boast. It was simply a statement of fact. Deputy Coyle put a hand on the mayor's arm, his expression troubled. "Let them go, Douglas. The girl would have died anyway, and then we'd have a death on our conscience. This way, she's Ward's problem." Wickham looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Caleb's eyes made him reconsider. He settled for drawing himself up to his full height, trying to salvage some dignity. "Fine. But the decree stands. Lila Morton is banished from Raven Hollow. If she ever sets foot in this town again, she'll be arrested. And you, Ward, you're no longer welcome to trade here. The council will make sure every merchant knows you're unwelcome." "Noted," Caleb said flatly. Then he turned his back on the mayor, on the deputy, on the entire town of Raven Hollow, and walked into the darkness with Lila cradled safely in his arms. The last thing Lila saw before exhaustion and cold finally claimed her was the lights of Raven Hollow fading behind them, and the first thing she felt was the steady rhythm of Caleb Ward's heart beating against her cheek as he carried her up the mountain path, away from everything she'd ever known, toward an uncertain future that somehow felt less frightening than the certain death she'd just escaped. Lila woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation after the bone-deep cold of the town square that for a moment she thought she'd died, and this was whatever came after. But death wouldn't hurt this much. Her wrists throbbed where the ropes had cut into her skin. Her face ached where Samuel had struck her. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. "Don't." The voice was quiet but firm. "You need to stay still a while longer." Memory flooded back. The chair, the snow, Caleb Ward cutting her loose and carrying her away from Raven Hollow. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim light. She was lying on something soft. A bed, she realized with wonder, an actual bed with blankets piled high. The room was small and constructed of rough-hewn logs, with gaps chinked with mud and moss. A fire crackled in a stone hearth along one wall, throwing dancing shadows across the ceiling. The air smelled of wood smoke and something cooking, something that made her empty stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. Caleb sat in a wooden chair near the fire, whittling something from a piece of pale wood. He didn't look at her, but she knew he was aware of every movement she made. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "My cabin, about 8 miles up the mountain from Raven Hollow." 8 miles. He'd carried her 8 miles through the snow and darkness. The realization made her throat tight. "Why?" she whispered. Now he did look at her, those gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "Why what? Why did you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Caleb was silent for a long moment, his knife moving steadily over the wood. Finally, he said, "Didn't sit right. What they were doing to you. People do things that don't sit right all the time. Most folks just look away. I'm not most folks." He stood and moved to the fire, where a pot hung over the flames. He ladled something into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "You need to eat. Slow, though. Your stomach won't handle much at first." The smell of the soup, thin broth with bits of meat and root vegetables, made Lila's head swim. She tried to push herself up to sitting, but her arms shook with the effort. Before she could protest, Caleb had set the bowl down and positioned himself behind her, supporting her weight as carefully as he might handle an injured animal. "I can—" she started. "You can't," he said simply. "Not yet. Let me help." There was no pity in his voice, no judgment, just a statement of fact. Lila relaxed against him, too weak to maintain her pride, and let him spoon the broth into her mouth. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted, or maybe she was just that hungry. Either way, she had to force herself to take small sips as instructed, when everything in her wanted to gulp it down. Halfway through the bowl, her stomach rebelled. Caleb seemed to sense it before she did, pulling the bowl away and easing her back down onto the bed. "That's enough for now. You can have more in a few hours." "Thank you," Lila whispered. He nodded once and returned to his chair by the fire. The whittling resumed, the soft scrape of blade on wood the only sound besides the crackling flames and the wind howling outside. Lila let her eyes drift closed, warm and fed for the first time in what felt like forever, and slipped back into sleep. The next time she woke, daylight filtered through a small window set high in the wall. The fire had burned lower, but the cabin was still warm. Caleb was gone, but she could hear sounds outside, the steady thunk of an axe biting into wood. Lila took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was sparse but well built, everything in it serving a clear purpose. Shelves held supplies: flour, salt, dried beans, coffee. Pelts hung from hooks along one wall, their fur thick and luxurious even in the dim light. Tools were arranged with military precision near the door. A rifle rested in brackets above the hearth, cleaned and oiled. This was the home of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. There were no extra chairs, no decorations, nothing to suggest Caleb Ward had ever expected or wanted company. She wondered what he thought of having her here, disrupting his solitude. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air, and Caleb himself, his arms loaded with split wood. He kicked the door shut behind him and began stacking the wood beside the hearth, not acknowledging her wakefulness. "How long was I asleep?" Lila asked. "About 6 hours." He selected 2 logs and added them to the fire, adjusting them with a poker until they caught. "It's mid-afternoon now. You should try to eat again." This time Lila managed to sit up on her own, though her head swam and her arms trembled. Caleb brought her the soup, reheated, with fresh chunks of meat added, and watched as she lifted the bowl to her lips. Her hands shook, spilling broth down her chin, but she managed several swallows before her strength gave out. "I'm sorry," she said, frustration making her voice sharp. "I'm not usually this useless." "You're not useless. You're recovering from exposure and starvation." He took the bowl from her hands. "Give it time." "How much time do I have?" The question came out harder than she'd intended. "Before you take me back down the mountain? Before you hand me over to the next town's charity?" Caleb's expression didn't change. "Is that what you think I'm going to do?" "I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know why you brought me here or what you want from me or—" Her voice cracked. "I don't understand any of this." He set the bowl aside and returned to his chair, his movements deliberate and unhurried. When he spoke, his voice was as level as ever. "I brought you here because you would have died in that square. I don't want anything from you except for you to heal, and when you're strong enough, we'll figure out what comes next, together." "Why would you care about what I want?" "Because you're a person, not a stray dog." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something flicker in their gray depths, anger maybe, or old pain. "What they did to you in that town was wrong. I won't be part of making you feel worthless all over again by treating you like you don't get a say in your own life." Lila felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I don't even know you." "No," Caleb agreed. "You don't. But you've got time to learn, if you want to stay." "Stay? Here?" "Winter's setting in hard. Even if you wanted to leave, you couldn't make it down the mountain for at least 2 months, maybe 3. The passes will be snowed in by tomorrow." He pulled out his whittling knife again, turning the piece of wood over in his hands. "You can stay here until spring, help around the cabin, earn your keep. When the thaw comes, I'll take you wherever you want to go. You'll have enough supplies and money from trapping to start over somewhere new." It was the most she'd heard him say at once, and the offer hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. "What if I'm a terrible house guest?" Lila asked, trying for levity and not quite managing it. What if I burn your food and ruin your pelts and drive you insane with my chatter? The corner of Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then I'll deal with it. I've survived worse than bad cooking. Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the strangeness of her situation, Lila felt something like hope kindle in her chest. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll stay. Caleb nodded once, as if the matter was settled, and returned his attention to his whittling. But Lila thought she saw his shoulders relax slightly, the tension easing from his posture. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Lila's strength returned slowly, measured in small victories. On the third day, she could stand without her legs shaking. On the fifth, she could walk from the bed to the fire without needing to rest. By the end of the first week, she insisted on helping with the daily tasks despite Caleb's protests. "You're pushing too hard," he said, watching her struggle to pull on the boots he'd given her, his spare pair, far too large but stuffed with wool to make them fit. "I'm not an invalid," Lila replied, her jaw set with determination. "And I won't be a burden. You said I could earn my keep. Let me." He studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Start with something small. The pelts on that rack need cleaning. I'll show you how." Cleaning pelts, Lila discovered, was meticulous work that required patience and a steady hand. Caleb demonstrated once, his movements efficient and practiced, scraping away the last bits of fat and tissue without damaging the fur. Then he handed her a scraping tool and stepped back. Her first attempt was clumsy, the blade slipping and nearly puncturing the hide. Caleb's hand shot out, steadying hers, guiding the angle. "Gentle," he said quietly. "The fur is strong, but the leather can tear. Think of it like petting a cat that might scratch you if you're too rough." Lila couldn't help but laugh. "Have you ever petted a cat?" "Once. Got scratched." But there was something in his voice that might have been humor. She tried again, this time with more care, and managed a clean stroke that removed a strip of tissue without damaging the pelt. Caleb made a sound of approval and returned to his own work. They fell into a companionable silence, broken only by the scrape of their tools and the crackling fire. Lila found herself sneaking glances at her unexpected host. In profile, his face was all hard angles and weathered skin, the face of a man who'd spent more time talking to mountains than people. But his hands were steady and gentle as he worked the pelts, treating each one with care. "How long have you been up here?" she asked eventually. "On the mountain, I mean." 7 years. The answer came without hesitation, as if he'd been expecting the question. "You came from somewhere else, though. Your accent, it's not local." "Massachusetts, outside Boston." He didn't look up from his work. "Long time ago now." Lila wanted to ask more. Why he'd left, what had brought him to these remote mountains, whether he had family somewhere wondering about him. But something in the set of his shoulders warned her off. Those were doors he wasn't ready to open. Instead, she said, "Will you teach me to trap? While I'm here?" Now he did look at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to start over somewhere new, I should have skills. Real skills, not just washing clothes and scrubbing floors. You said I could earn my keep. I want to learn everything you can teach me." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but we start small. Basic snares first, and you follow my instructions exactly. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes." "I can do that." "We'll see." The next morning, Caleb woke her before dawn. "Get dressed, warm as you can. We're going out." Lila pulled on every layer she owned, the dress she'd been wearing when he rescued her, now cleaned and mended with a thick wool shirt over it and the oversized coat Caleb had given her. The boots, stuffed with extra socks. A knitted cap that came down over her ears. She felt like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes, but at least she was warm. Outside, the world had transformed into something from a winter tale. Snow blanketed everything in shades of white and blue, the trees heavy with it, the air so cold and clean it hurt to breathe. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. "Stay close," Caleb said, his breath forming clouds. "Step where I step. The snow hides dangers, holes, loose rocks, weak ice over streams. You wander off the path. You could break a leg, or worse." Lila nodded, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. No neighbors to call for help. No doctor within miles, just the two of them, and the unforgiving wilderness. Caleb led her along a narrow trail that wound through the trees, pointing out signs as they went. See those tracks? Rabbit. And there, fox following the rabbit. Everything up here is hunting or being hunted. You remember that? You'll stay alive. He showed her how to set a simple snare, bending a young sapling and securing it with a trigger mechanism so subtle Lila almost couldn't see it. The rabbit comes through, puts pressure on the trigger, and the sapling springs up, catching him, quick and clean. Doesn't it hurt them? Lila asked, then felt foolish. Of course it hurt them. That was the point. But Caleb didn't mock her. Some. But less than starving to death would hurt us. The mountain provides, but you have to be willing to take what it offers. Survival isn't gentle. They set 5 snares that morning, each one carefully placed along what Caleb identified as game trails. By the time they headed back to the cabin, Lila's feet were numb and her cheeks burned from the cold, but she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. The days developed a pattern. Wake before dawn, check the trap lines, return to the cabin. Breakfast, usually cornmeal mush or leftover stew. Then work, cleaning pelts, mending clothes, chopping wood, preparing food. Caleb taught her how to recognize different animal tracks, how to judge the weather by the behavior of birds, how to tell if ice was safe to cross. He taught her which plants could be eaten and which would kill her, how to start a fire with damp wood, how to keep her core warm even when her extremities were frozen. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Lila asked one afternoon as they worked together stretching a beaver pelt. "You said you'd get me to a new town in spring. I won't need wilderness skills in a town." Caleb's hands paused in their work. Maybe not, but a person who knows how to survive anywhere isn't at the mercy of other people's charity, isn't trapped because they don't have options. His eyes met hers. You want to make sure you're never tied to a chair in a town square again? Make sure you can always walk away. The simple truth of it struck Lila like a blow. He wasn't just teaching her to trap animals. He was teaching her to be free. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and returned to the pelt, but she saw the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the way his expression softened just a fraction. As the weeks passed, Lila found herself settling into the rhythm of mountain life in a way she'd never settled into anything in Raven Hollow. There was something deeply satisfying about the work, about seeing the direct results of her efforts. Pelts cleaned and stretched meant furs to sell. Snares checked and reset meant meat for dinner. Wood chopped meant warmth through the night. Everything connected to everything else in a web of survival that made sense in a way town life never had. She learned that Caleb was a man of few words but profound observation. He noticed everything, the way she favored her left hand when scraping pelts, the slight limp she developed after walking too far on her healing ankle, the way she went quiet when the wind howled particularly loud at night. He never commented on these things directly, but he would adjust their work schedule, or bring her willow bark tea for the pain, or tell her stories about his early days on the mountain when the silence had been so complete he'd thought he might go mad. "What changed?" Lila asked during one of these rare storytelling sessions. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, the remains of rabbit stew still warming on the hearth. "You didn't go mad, obviously. So what made the silence bearable?" Caleb stared into the flames for a long time. "I stopped fighting it. Stopped trying to fill it with noise or memories or regrets. Started listening instead." "Listening to what?" "Everything. The wind, the creek, the animals moving through the forest, my own thoughts." He glanced at her. "The silence isn't empty. It's full of things most people never take the time to hear." Lila considered this. "Is that why you stay? Because you like listening?" "Partly." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "Partly because there's nothing down in the world of people I need or want anymore." "What about family?" The muscles in his jaw tightened. "Had a wife once, Anna. She died up here 6 years ago. Winter storm came out of nowhere while I was checking trap lines. By the time I got back..." He fell silent, the firelight casting harsh shadows across his face. Lila's throat tightened. I'm sorry. She was pregnant. Did I mention that? His voice had gone flat, emotionless. 4 months along. We were going to name the baby Sarah if it was a girl, James if it was a boy. Anna had it all planned out. He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the darkness. I tried to save her, tried everything I knew, but I didn't know enough. And the mountain doesn't forgive ignorance any more than it forgives mistakes. That's why you came back for me, Lila said softly, understanding clicking into place. In the square, you saw someone dying who didn't have to die and you couldn't— I could save you, Caleb interrupted, his voice rough. I couldn't save her, but I could save you. Maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe I did it more for myself than for you. But I did it, and I don't regret it. Lila stood and crossed to him, her reflection ghostly in the dark window glass beside his. You're not selfish. You're the first person in my entire life who's ever treated me like I was worth something. That's not selfish. That's— Her voice caught. That's everything. He turned to look at her, and in the firelight his eyes were no longer gray and cold, but warm, almost tender. You were always worth something, Lila. The people in that town were just too blind to see it. They stood there in silence, the space between them charged with something Lila couldn't quite name. Then Caleb stepped back, breaking the moment. It's late. You should sleep. We have a long day tomorrow. But that night, as Lila lay in the bed, Caleb insisted she take it while he slept in a bedroll by the fire. She found herself thinking about Anna, about a woman who'd loved a taciturn mountain man enough to follow him into isolation, about a baby who'd never been born, about grief so deep it drove a man to hide from the world for 6 years. And she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she and Caleb Ward were more alike than either of them had realized, both of them broken by loss, both of them learning to survive in the spaces between what was and what might have been. The winter deepened. Snow piled higher against the cabin walls. The temperature plunged so low that water froze in the bucket overnight despite the fire. On those coldest nights, Lila would wake to find Caleb adding logs to the hearth every few hours, keeping the flames alive, keeping them both alive. She noticed other things too. The way he always made sure she ate first, taking smaller portions for himself. How he would disappear into the woods during the worst storms, returning hours later with fresh game when their supplies ran low. The careful way he'd mended her dress, his large hands working the needle with surprising delicacy. You don't have to take care of me like this, she said one morning as he handed her a plate with the larger share of their breakfast. I'm stronger now. I can handle equal portions. I know you can, Caleb replied, but you're still recovering, building your strength back. I'm used to lean times. My body knows how to stretch what it gets. Yours doesn't, not yet. When will you stop treating me like I'm fragile? He studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. The day you prove you're not, I suppose. It felt like a challenge. Lila lifted her chin. Fine. Then let me come with you on the long trap line tomorrow, the one you always check alone. That's a 10-mile circuit through rough country. So teach me how to handle it. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Respect, maybe, or the ghost of a smile. All right, but we leave at first light, and if I say we turn back, we turn back. No arguments. No arguments, Lila agreed. The next morning, they set out into a world of white and blue and blinding sun on snow. Caleb moved through the landscape with the confidence of long familiarity, but he adjusted his pace for Lila, stopping frequently to let her catch her breath or pointing out landmarks. See that dead pine with the split trunk? That's the marker for the first line of traps, running east along the ridge. And those 3 rocks stacked like a cairn? I built that as a marker for the spring crossing. It's the only safe place to ford when the snow melts. Lila memorized each landmark, understanding that this knowledge might one day mean the difference between finding her way home and freezing to death in an unmarked wilderness. They checked each trap methodically. Most were empty, but 3 held rabbits, and 1 had caught a fox. Caleb showed Lila how to dispatch the animals quickly and humanely, how to field dress them to reduce weight, how to reset the traps. It was bloody work, and her stomach turned more than once, but she forced herself to watch, to learn, to understand that survival required her to be harder than she'd ever been in Raven Hollow. On the way back, a storm rolled in without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next it had turned bruise purple and angry. Wind whipped the snow into blinding sheets. "We need to find shelter," Caleb shouted over the howl of the wind. He grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her along as he fought through the whiteout conditions. Lila couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Snow stung her face, found its way inside her collar despite her best efforts. Her legs burned with exhaustion, and the cold was seeping through her layers. She stumbled, nearly fell, but Caleb's grip on her hand was iron strong. Then suddenly they were under an overhang of rock, the wind still screaming, but the snow no longer battering them directly. Caleb released her hand and began gathering deadfall from the back of the shallow cave. "Help me," he said shortly. "We need a fire." Together they built a small fire at the mouth of the cave, using precious matches from Caleb's pack. The flames caught reluctantly, but once they started, they drove back the cold enough to stop Lila's violent shivering. "How long will the storm last?" she asked, huddling close to the flames. "Could be an hour, could be all night." Caleb removed his pack and pulled out strips of dried meat, handing her several. "Either way, we wait it out. Moving in a whiteout is suicide. You get turned around, lose your landmarks, walk in circles until you die." They sat in silence, feeding the fire, listening to the storm rage outside their small shelter. Lila found herself acutely aware of Caleb beside her, his solid presence a comfort in the chaos of wind and snow. "Are you scared?" she asked eventually. "Of the storm?" "No. Cautious, but not scared. I've weathered worse." "The storm that killed Anna, was it like this?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't shut down the way she half expected. "Worse. Came from the north like the breath of hell itself. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. Wind strong enough to knock a man down. I was 2 miles out when it hit, and I tried to run back, tried so hard." He closed his eyes. Found her 3 hours later, huddled by the fire she'd kept alive as long as she could. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. "It wasn't your fault," Lila said softly. "Doesn't matter whose fault it was. She's still gone." He opened his eyes, staring into the flames. "For a long time after, I hoped another storm would come for me. Finish what that one started. But the mountain doesn't work that way. It takes what it wants and leaves the rest to live with it." Lila reached out tentatively and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. He didn't pull away. "I'm glad it left you," she said. "I'm glad you were there in the square that night. I'm glad you're here now." Caleb turned his hand over, his palm warm against hers. "I'm glad too," he admitted quietly. "Didn't think I would be. Didn't want company, didn't want to care about anyone's survival but my own. But having you in the cabin, hearing someone else breathing at night, seeing your footprints next to mine in the snow." He paused, searching for words. "It matters. You matter." Lila's heart squeezed in her chest. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her parents, not the people of Raven Hollow, not anyone. "You matter." "Caleb," she started, but didn't know how to finish. He seemed to understand anyway. His hand tightened on hers briefly, then released. "Storm's easing. We should head back while we still have daylight." The walk back to the cabin was quieter, both of them lost in thought. But something had shifted between them during those hours in the cave. Some barrier had cracked, if not quite broken. That night, after dinner, Caleb surprised her by pulling out a worn book from a shelf she hadn't noticed before. "Can you read?" he asked. "Yes, my mother taught me." "Good." He handed her the book, a collection of poetry, the pages soft with age and handling. Anna loved this. Used to read it aloud on long winter nights. I haven't been able to open it since she died, but... He shrugged, uncomfortable. "Thought maybe you'd like to read some, if you want." Lila opened the book carefully, seeing the faded inscription on the first page. "To my darling Anna, may these words bring you comfort in the wild places. All my love, C." She looked up at Caleb, understanding the weight of what he'd just given her, this small piece of his past, this glimpse into the man he'd been before grief hardened him. "I'd be honored," she said. She read that night, her voice soft in the firelit cabin, and Caleb sat with his whittling and listened. When she finished the third poem, she glanced over to find his eyes closed, his expression peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. "Keep going," he said quietly. Please." So she did, reading until her voice grew hoarse and the fire burned low, sharing words that Anna had loved with the man who still mourned her, and finding in the act something like healing for them both. The next weeks brought a thaw in more ways than one. Caleb talked more, sharing stories about his life before the mountain, his childhood in Massachusetts, his time as a carpenter's apprentice, how he'd met Anna at a church social and known immediately she was different from every other girl he'd met. Lila shared her own stories too, the loneliness of growing up different in a small town, the desperate need to belong that had made her try so hard to please people who would never accept her. "You know what I've realized?" she said one evening as they prepared dinner together, Lila chopping vegetables while Caleb tended the pot. "I spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller, taking up less space, eating less, talking less, wanting less, trying to be invisible so people wouldn't notice how much I didn't fit. But up here, there's no one to perform for. No one judging whether I'm too much or not enough. I can just be." Caleb nodded slowly. "Mountain does that. Strips away all the pretense. Nothing up here but what's real. Is that why you stayed? Even after Anna died?" "Partly. Down in the towns, people would have wanted me to explain, to grieve the way they thought I should, to move on according to their timeline. Up here, I could grieve however I needed. For as long as I needed." He glanced at her. "Until I was ready to let someone else in again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lila's pulse quickened. "Caleb..." A sound outside cut her off. Caleb's head snapped toward the door, his body going still and alert. "Get behind me," he said quietly, his hand moving to the rifle above the hearth. "What is it?" "Horses. Multiple riders." His face had gone hard, his eyes cold. "And they're coming up the mountain." Lila's blood turned to ice. She'd known this peace couldn't last forever, but she'd let herself hope that winter would keep them safe, that the snow would be barrier enough against the ugliness they'd left behind in Raven Hollow. Caleb moved with swift efficiency, checking the rifle's load before handing Lila a smaller pistol from a drawer she hadn't known existed. "You know how to use this?" "No," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Point it at what you want to hit. Pull the trigger. It kicks hard, so brace yourself." He positioned her near the back corner of the cabin, away from the windows. "Stay there unless I tell you otherwise. And Lila..." His eyes locked with hers. "If things go badly, there's a trail out the back that leads deeper into the mountains. Follow it for 2 miles and you'll find a hunter's shelter I use in summer. Wait there. Don't come back for me. I'm not leaving you. You'll do what I tell you if you want to stay alive." His voice was hard, but his hand was gentle as he touched her cheek briefly. "I didn't save you, just to let them drag you back to that town. Promise me." Before she could answer, a voice called out from beyond the cabin door. "Ward! Caleb Ward! We know you're in there, and we know you've got the girl." Lila recognized that voice. Mayor Wickham, his words slightly slurred. Whether from cold or drink, she couldn't tell. Caleb positioned himself by the window, rifle ready, but not yet aimed. "This is private property, Wickham. You're trespassing." "The hell we are!" Another voice, younger and angrier. Samuel Brennan. "You kidnapped a prisoner of Raven Hollow. That's a crime. I freed a girl from dying of exposure. Only crime here is what you people did to her." "We have the right to enforce our own justice," Wickham shouted back. "The council voted..." "Your council doesn't have jurisdiction 8 miles up a mountain on land I own." Caleb's voice remained eerily calm. "Turn around and go home. This is your only warning." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of horses stamping and men muttering among themselves. Lila counted at least 5 distinct voices, maybe more. Her hand shook as she gripped the pistol Caleb had given her. "We're not leaving without the girl." That was Deputy Coyle, trying to sound authoritative and failing. "Mr. Ward, be reasonable. You've made your point, but she's got to face her punishment." "For stealing grain you can't prove she took," Caleb interrupted. "Grain that was spoiled and worthless to begin with? You really rode 8 miles in the snow for that?" "It's the principle," Samuel yelled. "Can't let people think they can just steal and get away with it." "This isn't about the grain," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something colder than the winter air. "This is about pride. Your mayor's pride got wounded when I defied him, So he convinced you boys to ride up here in the middle of winter on a fool's errand. And now here you are, freezing your asses off, trying to reclaim something that was never yours in the first place. She belongs in Raven Hollow. Wickham's voice had risen to a near shriek. That's where she was born, where she'll answer for what she's done. She doesn't belong to anyone, Caleb replied, least of all you. Now I'm going to count to 10, and if you're still here when I reach 10, I start shooting. Not to kill, not yet, but I promise you'll ride back down this mountain with new holes you didn't have coming up. You're threatening officers of the law? You're not officers. You're a mob with delusions of authority. 1, Ward, don't be stupid. 2, there's 6 of us and 1 of you, Samuel shouted. You can't win this. 3, 4. Caleb's voice never wavered, but Lila saw his finger move to the trigger. Maybe we should go, she heard someone mutter. This is crazy riding up here in the dark. We're not leaving, Wickham snapped. Not without that thief. 5, 6. Rush him! Samuel's voice cracked with fury. Rush the cabin. He can't shoot all of us. 7. The sound of men dismounting, boots crunching in snow. Lila's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Through the window she could see shadows moving, spreading out to surround the cabin. 8. Last chance, Ward, Wickham called. Send the girl out and we'll let you live. 9. A bottle arced through the air, trailing fire. It crashed through the window in an explosion of glass and flame. Kerosene, Lila realized with horror. They'd made a firebomb. Caleb moved instantly, firing through the broken window even as he grabbed a blanket to smother the flames. The rifle's report was deafening in the enclosed space. Outside, someone screamed in pain. You shot me! The bastard shot me! Return fire, Wickham ordered. The world erupted into chaos. Bullets splintered wood as they punched through the cabin's walls. Caleb threw himself flat, pulling Lila down with him as the air above them turned deadly. He crawled to a different window, fired twice more. Another cry of pain from outside. He's only got 1 rifle, Samuel yelled. Keep him pinned while I get to the door. Caleb swore under his breath and moved again, this time to cover the door. But before he could get into position, something heavy slammed against it. Once, twice. The heavy wooden bar Caleb had installed held, but splinters appeared in the wood. The back, Caleb hissed at Lila. Go now. Not without you. I'll be right behind you. Go! The door cracked on the 4th impact. Lila saw Samuel's enraged face through the gap, saw his pistol come up. Without thinking, she raised her own pistol and pulled the trigger. The kick nearly knocked her backwards. The shot went wild, missing Samuel, but shattering the doorframe near his head. He ducked back with a yelp of surprise. Well, hell, Caleb muttered, something almost like pride in his voice. Guess you're not running after all. He fired through the damaged door, forcing Samuel and whoever was with him to retreat. Then he moved to Lila's side, reloading with practiced speed. If we're doing this together, stay low and watch your angles. They'll try to flank us. Another firebomb sailed through a different window. This one Caleb caught in midair with the blanket, smothering it before it could spread. But the smoke was beginning to fill the cabin, making Lila's eyes water and her throat burn. We can't stay here, she gasped. No, Caleb agreed grimly. We can't. When I give the signal, we go out the back together, fast and low. Make for the tree line and don't stop until I tell you. What's the signal? Caleb pulled something from his coat, a small package wrapped in waxed paper. This. He lit the fuse with a burning ember from the scattered fire and threw it out the broken front window. 3 seconds later, an explosion rocked the night. Men shouted in panic and confusion. Horses screamed and bolted. Now! Caleb grabbed Lila's hand and they burst through the back door into the freezing darkness. The snow was knee-deep and treacherous. Lila stumbled, but Caleb's iron grip kept her upright as they crashed through the drifts toward the tree line. Behind them, she could hear Wickham screaming orders, trying to rally his scattered men. There! They're running! After them! Bullets whined through the air, kicking up spurts of snow. One passed so close to Lila's head she felt the displacement of air. Then they were in the trees, the dense pines providing cover, the darkness absolute. Caleb didn't slow down. He navigated the forest like he could see in the dark, pulling Lila along paths she couldn't even detect. Branches tore at her clothes and face. Her lungs burned with the effort of running through deep snow at altitude. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just focused on keeping her feet moving and her grip on Caleb's hand. Behind them, their pursuers crashed through the underbrush with far less grace. "Spread out!" she heard Samuel yell. "They can't have gone far." "Are you insane?" someone else replied. "It's pitch black and we don't know this mountain. We'll get lost or fall off a cliff. I don't care. Find them." Caleb pulled Lila behind a massive fallen tree, pressing her down into the hollow beneath it. He put his finger to his lips, his eyes catching what little starlight filtered through the canopy. They could hear the men searching, getting closer. "Ward!" Wickham's voice echoed through the trees. "You're only making this worse. Give up the girl and we'll let bygones be bygones." Caleb's expression said exactly what he thought of that offer. He checked his rifle, then pulled out his hunting knife. The blade gleamed dully in the darkness. 2 men passed within 10 feet of their hiding spot, so close Lila could hear them breathing. "This is stupid," one muttered. "We're going to die out here." "Shut up and keep looking," the other replied, though his voice held no conviction. They moved on. Caleb waited until their footsteps had faded, then leaned close to whisper directly into Lila's ear. "There's a ravine half a mile north. Too wide to jump, too steep to climb down in the dark. If we can get them to chase us toward it, they'll have to give up or risk killing themselves." "What if we fall into it?" "I know where the crossing is. They don't. Trust me." She did. Against all logic, against all reason, she trusted this man with her life. She nodded. They moved again, deliberately making noise this time, drawing the hunters toward them. "Over there!" Samuel's shout split the night. "I heard something." The chase resumed. But now Caleb was leading them on his terms, taking them deeper into the mountains, into terrain he knew like the back of his hand. He led them up a steep incline that had the men behind them gasping and swearing, down through a narrow gap between 2 boulders that forced them to go single file, across a frozen stream where the ice groaned but held, and always north, toward the ravine. Lila could hear it before she could see it, a deeper darkness in the already dark forest, a change in the way sound carried. Caleb slowed, counting his steps, then angled sharply to the left. 30 paces later, he stopped at what looked like a solid wall of undergrowth. "Through here," he whispered, pulling aside branches to reveal a narrow path. "It leads to a natural bridge. Move fast once we're across. The ground's unstable." They crossed in single file, Lila following so close she could feel Caleb's coat brushing against her. Beneath her feet she could feel empty air, could sense the deadly drop on either side, though she couldn't see it. She focused on breathing, on moving, on not thinking about what would happen if she slipped. Then they were across, back on solid ground. Caleb pulled her into the shelter of a cluster of rocks and waited. The pursuers were close now, crashing through the undergrowth with the desperation of men who knew they were losing their quarry. Samuel emerged from the trees first, his face scratched and bleeding from branches, his fine coat torn. "They came this way. I know they did." He took 3 more steps and stopped dead. Even in the darkness, even half mad with rage, he could sense the ravine, could feel the wrongness of the empty space ahead. "Samuel, wait!" Deputy Coyle grabbed his arm. "There's something—" But Samuel yanked free and took another step forward. The ground crumbled beneath his boot. He windmilled his arms, trying to catch himself, and for a terrible moment Lila thought he was going to fall. Then Coyle had him, pulling him back from the edge. "It's a ravine," Coyle gasped. "We nearly walked right into it." The other men caught up, panting and wild-eyed. Mayor Wickham looked worse than any of them, his face purple with exertion, his expensive coat covered in snow and torn by branches. "Where are they?" he wheezed. "Could be anywhere," one of the other men said. He was older, and even in the darkness, Lila could see the defeat in his posture. "Could have crossed somewhere we didn't see, could have doubled back. We're never going to find them in the dark." "We can't give up." "The hell we can't." The old man rounded on Wickham. "I've got frostbite starting in my toes. Dutch nearly broke his ankle back there, and Samuel almost fell to his death just now. This is madness, Douglas. That girl ain't worth dying for. It's the principle. The principle is that we're going to freeze to death or get lost or killed if we keep this up," another man interjected. "I say we head back, wait for daylight, maybe bring more men." If we leave now, they'll disappear into the mountains and we'll never find them." "Then maybe that's how it's meant to be," Deputy Coyle said quietly. "Maybe we should take it as a sign and let it go." "You coward!" Wickham spat. "All of you cowards! Fine, go back if you want. I'll find them myself." But even as he said it, he was backing away from the ravine, his bravado crumbling in the face of the mountain's indifference. The others were already retreating, eager to put distance between themselves and this fool's errand. Samuel lingered longest, staring into the darkness where he thought Lila and Caleb had disappeared. "This isn't over, Ward," he shouted into the night. "You hear me? This isn't over." His words echoed off the rocks and faded into silence. Then he too turned and followed the others back toward Raven Hollow, leaving only footprints and broken branches to mark their passage. Caleb and Lila remained hidden for another hour, making sure the retreat wasn't a trick. When Caleb finally moved, his muscles were stiff with cold, and Lila could barely feel her feet. "Come on," he said softly. "We need to get somewhere warm." They couldn't go back to the cabin. It might be watched, and after the fire damage, it might not even be safe. Instead, Caleb led them on a winding path deeper into the mountains to the summer shelter he'd told her about. It took another 2 hours of hard hiking before they stumbled into the small structure, little more than 4 walls and a roof, but enough to break the wind. Caleb got a fire going while Lila collapsed against the wall, shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. When the flames were burning steady, he sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders, sharing his warmth. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I shot at someone." Lila's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I actually pulled the trigger and tried to hurt another person." "You were protecting yourself, protecting us both." "Does it get easier, the violence?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't get easier. You just get better at living with it." They sat in silence, watching the fire, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away. Lila became aware that she was leaning against Caleb's chest, that his arm was still around her, that she could feel his heartbeat through his coat. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. That mayor won't let this go." "I know." "What do we do?" "Survive," Caleb said simply. "Same as we've been doing. We stay up here until spring, we keep watch, and if they come again," he paused, "if they come again, I'll make sure they understand what it means to threaten what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a warm shiver down her spine. "Yours?" she asked softly. Caleb's arm tightened around her. "If you want to be. If you'll have a broken-down hermit with more scars than sense." Lila twisted to look up at him, seeing his face clearly for the first time in hours. The firelight caught the angles of his jaw, the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and harder losses. But she also saw the gentleness in his expression when he looked at her, the protective fierceness that had made him defy a whole town, the loneliness that matched her own. "I'm not exactly a prize either," she said. "A girl nobody wanted who got herself accused of theft and nearly killed. Those people were fools. You're strong and brave, and you didn't break even when they tried their damnedest to break you." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You matter, Lila Morton. To me, you matter more than anything." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Lila melted into it, into him, letting herself feel safe for the first time since this nightmare had begun. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise you easy," he said quietly. "Life up here is hard, and it just got harder. But I can promise you won't face it alone. Not anymore." "That's all I've ever wanted," Lila whispered back, "to not be alone." They stayed in the shelter for 3 days, keeping the fire burning, eating from Caleb's emergency supplies, and healing. The first morning, they woke wrapped around each other for warmth, and by silent agreement, neither pulled away. They talked about everything and nothing, Caleb's childhood dreams of being a ship's carpenter, Lila's secret desire to learn to read more than just basic words, the future they might build if they survived the winter. On the 4th day, Caleb decided it was safe enough to scout the cabin. He made Lila stay at the shelter, despite her protests, and disappeared into the early morning mist. She spent the hours he was gone pacing and worrying, jumping at every sound, her hand never far from the pistol he'd left with her. When he finally returned, his expression was grim. The cabin's still standing, but they ransacked the inside looking for you. Tore through everything I owned, stole some supplies, destroyed others out of spite. I'm sorry, Lila said. This is all my fault. Stop. Caleb's voice was sharp. This is their fault. Their cruelty, their pettiness, their inability to see a person's worth. Don't you dare take responsibility for their ugliness. He pulled her close, and she felt his body trembling slightly. Whether from cold or his anger, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. What do we do now? She asked into his chest. We fortify. Set up better defenses. I've got traps that'll make them think twice about coming back. And if they do come back, his voice went cold and hard. I'll make sure Wickham understands I meant every word I said. They won't take you from me. I don't care how many of them come. They spent the next week preparing. Caleb showed Lila how to set deadly snares designed for humans instead of animals, how to create false trails that led to cliffs and deadfalls, how to booby-trap approaches to the cabin. He taught her to shoot properly, spending precious ammunition until she could hit a target 3 times out of 5. He carved marks on trees in a code only they understood, creating a network of warnings and safe paths through the forest around the cabin. You're building a fortress, Lila observed one evening as they worked by lamplight to repair the damage to the cabin. I'm protecting what matters. Caleb's eyes met hers across the room. I lost Anna because I wasn't prepared. I won't lose you the same way. What if... Lila hesitated, then forced herself to continue. What if loving someone makes us both weaker? Makes us vulnerable? Maybe it does, Caleb admitted, but it also gives us something worth fighting for. I spent 6 years just surviving, just getting through each day. Now I've got a reason to do more than survive. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've felt since she died. Lila crossed the room and kissed him, hard and desperate, trying to pour into it all the things she didn't have words for. When they broke apart, she pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her hand. Promise me something, she said. Anything. If they come again, if things go wrong, promise me you won't sacrifice yourself trying to save me. I couldn't bear it if you died for me. Caleb's jaw tightened. I can't promise that. Caleb? No. He caught her hand, held it tight. I can't promise I won't do everything in my power to keep you safe, including dying if that's what it takes. That's not how this works. You don't get to matter to me and then ask me to let you die. That's not fair. Life's not fair. Death's not fair. Love sure as hell isn't fair. His eyes blazed in the lamplight. But it's real, and it's ours, and I'll defend it with my last breath if I have to. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to make him see reason, but she knew it would be useless. The same stubborn determination that had made him cut her free in the town square, that had made him defy the mayor, that had made him carry her 8 miles through the snow, that determination would make him fight for her life even at the cost of his own. So instead she just held him, breathing in his scent of wood smoke and pine and leather, memorizing the solid warmth of him, and prayed to whatever forces governed these mountains that it wouldn't come to that choice. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing the world in fresh white, covering their tracks and the evidence of their preparations. In the morning, Lila woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window with his rifle in hand, watching the tree line. What is it? She asked, instantly alert. Maybe nothing, but his voice was tight. Thought I saw smoke to the south. Could be my imagination. It wasn't his imagination. 2 hours later, they spotted the riders, more this time, at least 8 men, maybe 10. And leading them was a figure Lila recognized even at a distance by the expensive fur coat and the military-style hat. Mayor Wickham had returned, and this time he'd brought an army. Caleb's face went hard as stone as he counted the approaching riders. 10 men, all armed. They're serious this time. Lila felt her stomach drop. We can't fight 10 men. We don't have to fight them all. Just make it hurt enough that they give up. He moved away from the window, checking his weapons with swift efficiency. You remember everything I taught you? Yes, but no buts. They'll try to surround the cabin first, cut off our escape routes, but I've got surprises waiting for them. His eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering. Stay calm. Stay focused. We've survived worse than Douglas Wickham's wounded pride. They hadn't, though, not really. But Lila appreciated the lie, appreciated the confidence in Caleb's voice even if she didn't share it. The riders approached cautiously this time, spread out in a wide formation. They'd learned from their last attempt. Wickham stayed back, letting younger, more expendable men take the lead. Lila recognized Samuel Brennan on the far left, and Deputy Coyle looking distinctly uncomfortable on the right flank. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, just beyond rifle range. A white cloth appeared tied to a stick. Wickham rode forward a few paces, staying carefully behind this makeshift flag of truce. "Ward, I'm here to talk." Caleb opened the door just enough to be heard, his rifle trained on the mayor. "Talk fast, my finger's getting tired." "We don't want bloodshed," Wickham called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "I've brought a reasonable proposal. Send the girl out, and you can keep your cabin and your life. I'll even let you trade in Raven Hollow again once a suitable period has passed." "That's your proposal?" Caleb's voice dripped with contempt. "I give you the girl so you can kill her, and in exchange you won't kill me? You must think I'm stupid." "We're not going to kill her. She'll serve her sentence. 3 days tied to a chair in freezing weather is a death sentence, and we both know it." Wickham's face flushed. "The council has reconsidered. Given the circumstances, we've decided to reduce her punishment to public flogging and a fine. 20 lashes and she can work off her debt to the community through labor." Lila felt sick. 20 lashes would leave her scarred for life, if she even survived them, and working off her debt would mean years of servitude, treated worse than a slave. "No," Caleb said flatly. "She's not going anywhere with you." "Be reasonable, Ward. I've brought 10 armed men. You can't win this fight. All you'll accomplish is getting yourself killed defending a worthless thief." The rifle shot interrupted him, kicking up snow inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared and Wickham nearly fell off, his face going white with shock and fury. "Next one goes through your leg," Caleb said calmly. "The one after that through something you'll miss more. Now get off my land before I stop being polite." "You just shot at a representative of the law," Wickham sputtered, struggling to control his panicked horse. "You're not the law. You're a petty tyrant with delusions of authority. Last chance, Douglas. Ride away now, or I start killing horses. Then you can walk back to Raven Hollow and explain to your men why you got them stranded in the mountains over a girl you couldn't even prove stole anything." For a moment, Wickham looked like he might actually retreat. Then Samuel Brennan's voice rang out. "He's bluffing! There's 10 of us and 2 of them. Rush the cabin!" Everything happened at once. Samuel spurred his horse forward with a wild yell. 3 other men followed, clearly caught up in the momentum. Caleb fired, his shot catching Samuel's horse in the shoulder. The animal went down hard, throwing Samuel into the snow. The other riders scattered, suddenly much less eager to charge. But the damage was done. The standoff had broken into open combat. "Get down!" Caleb shouted at Lila as bullets began slamming into the cabin walls. He returned fire methodically, each shot carefully aimed. Another horse went down, its rider tumbling into the snow with a cry of pain. Then Lila heard a scream from the left side of the cabin. A man's voice, high and terrified, cut off abruptly. One of Caleb's traps had been triggered. "What the hell was that?" someone yelled. "It's a deadfall. Miller's under it. Jesus Christ, there's blood everywhere." The attack faltered as the men realized the cabin wasn't the only danger. They began moving more cautiously, watching the ground, suddenly aware they were walking into a trap. Caleb used the confusion to reload, his hand steady despite the chaos. "They're going to try to burn us out again," he said quietly. "Watch for anyone carrying bottles or torches." Sure enough, Lila spotted movement near the tree line. 2 men creeping around toward the back of the cabin, one of them carrying what looked like wrapped rags soaked in kerosene. "Behind us!" she hissed. 2 men with fire!" Caleb moved to the back window without hesitation. He aimed carefully and fired. One of the men dropped, clutching his leg. The other froze, then turned and ran back toward the trees, abandoning his companion and the firebomb. "You sons of bitches!" the wounded man screamed. "He shot me! Douglas! He shot me!" Return fire, Wickham ordered from his safe position behind the rocks. Concentrate your fire on the front wall. The cabin shuddered under a sustained barrage. Splinters flew. A bullet passed through a gap in the logs and embedded itself in the back wall with a meaty thunk. The air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of black powder. Caleb grabbed Lila and pulled her below the window line. Stay down. They're trying to create an opening for another rush. How much ammunition do you have? Enough. But his jaw was tight, and Lila knew the answer wasn't as reassuring as he tried to make it sound. The shooting stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, they could hear Wickham shouting orders. Spread out! I want men on all four sides. He can't watch every direction at once. This is insane! That was Deputy Coyle's voice, louder than Lila had ever heard it. We've got 1 man dead and 2 wounded. For what? For a girl accused of stealing worthless grain? Shut your mouth, Martin. That's an order. I'm done taking orders that'll get me killed, Coyle shouted back. Anyone with sense should be done too. There was a moment of tense silence. Then Lila heard horses moving, not toward the cabin, but away from it. At least 3 riders, maybe 4. Cowards, Wickham screamed. You're all cowards. Fine. Run back to town. I'll remember this. But his voice had lost its authority. The men who remained were silent, clearly reconsidering their commitment to this fight. Caleb risked a glance through the window. 6 left, he reported quietly. They're losing their nerve. Will they give up? Depends on how much Wickham has promised them. Money makes men brave, or at least stupid. As if in answer, Wickham's voice rang out again. $50 to the man who brings me Lila Morton. Alive or dead, I don't care anymore. $50. $50. It was a fortune to men who made perhaps $1 a day when they could find work. Lila saw the calculation in Caleb's eyes. That kind of money would harden their resolve, make them willing to take risks they wouldn't otherwise consider. I could go out there, she said quietly. End this before anyone else gets hurt. Caleb turned to her, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing. Don't. Don't even think it. I told you, you're not going anywhere with them. But if I... He kissed her hard, cutting off her words. When he pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. You think I carried you 8 miles through the snow just to let you sacrifice yourself now? You think I taught you to survive, to fight, to be strong, just so you could give up the first time things got hard? He gripped her shoulders. We're in this together, you and me. Whatever comes, we face it side by side. Before Lila could respond, there was movement outside. 2 men were circling wide, trying to get behind the cabin while the others provided covering fire. Caleb saw them and swore. They're trying to split our attention. You take the back window, I'll hold the front. Anyone gets close enough to throw fire, you shoot them. Don't hesitate. Lila took position at the back window, her pistol heavy in her trembling hands. She could see the 2 men moving through the trees, using the trunks for cover, getting closer. 30 yards. 20. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then one of the men stepped wrong. There was a sharp crack like a breaking branch, followed by a scream that curdled Lila's blood. The man had triggered one of Caleb's snares, a bent sapling rigged with sharpened stakes. The trap had caught him across the chest and shoulder, the stakes driven deep. His companion panicked and ran, crashing through the underbrush back toward the other men, shouting incoherently about demons and death traps. How many more traps do you have out there? Lila asked, her voice shaking. Enough that they'll think twice about getting creative, Caleb replied grimly. But we're running out of time. They're going to figure out they can just wait us out. We've got food for maybe a week if we ration. They can rotate men, bring in supplies from town. So what do we do? Caleb was silent for a moment, thinking. Then his expression hardened with decision. We make them understand this mountain belongs to me, and that anyone who threatens you answers to me personally. He moved to the door, checking his rifle one last time. Cover me. I'm going out there. What? No, Caleb, that's suicide. It's psychology. Right now they think they're the hunters and we're cornered prey. I'm going to flip that script. He looked at her, his face set with determination. Trust me. Before she could stop him, he threw open the door and stepped out into the snow. The remaining men were so surprised by the sudden appearance that they didn't shoot immediately. Caleb used those precious seconds to move to his left, putting a large tree between himself and most of the guns. "Wickham," he called out. "You wanted to settle this like men? Let's settle it, you and me. No guns, no tricks, just two men with knives. I win, you take your people and leave. You win, you can have whatever you came for." "Why would I agree to that when I've got 6 armed men?" "Because you've already lost 3 to my traps, and you're going to lose more if you keep pushing. Because your men are scared and demoralized, and some of them have already run. Because you know if you send them at this cabin again, I'll kill as many as I can reach and you'll have their blood on your hands." Caleb's voice dropped, cold and deadly. "Or maybe because you're not a complete coward, and you'll face me yourself instead of hiding behind hired guns." The silence stretched. Lila could see Wickham's face, could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Pride versus prudence. The desire to save face versus the very real risk of dying in the snow. "You expect me to believe you'll honor a deal like that?" Wickham finally said. "I give you my word. You beat me, you can take the girl and go. Hell, you can shoot me as you leave if it makes you feel better." Caleb paused. "But we both know you won't beat me. You're soft from town living, and I've been surviving in these mountains for 7 years. You'll be dead in under a minute." It was the insult that did it. The suggestion that he was soft, that he couldn't match a mountain hermit in combat. Lila saw Wickham's face flush dark red. "Fine," he spat. "Fine, we'll do it your way, but when I gut you like a pig, that girl's mine." He dismounted, pulled a large hunting knife from his belt, and started forward. Samuel Brennan, back on his feet after his horse went down, called out, "Mayor, you don't have to shut up, Samuel, I'm ending this." The 2 men met in the open ground between the cabin and the rocks. Lila's heart hammered as she watched from the window, her pistol ready in case any of the other men decided to interfere. They circled each other warily. Wickham was bigger, heavier, with the kind of bulk that came from good eating and little physical labor. But Caleb moved like a predator, balanced, controlled, every muscle coiled and ready. Wickham struck first, a wild slash that would have opened Caleb's belly if it had connected. But Caleb wasn't there anymore. He'd slipped to the side with minimal movement, making Wickham's knife cut only air. The mayor tried again, stabbing this time. Caleb caught his wrist mid-thrust, twisted, and Wickham's knife went flying into the snow. Before the mayor could react, Caleb had him in a headlock, his own knife pressed against Wickham's throat. "It's over," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "You lost. Now call off your men and go home." Wickham's face had gone purple, whether from rage or the pressure on his throat. Lila couldn't tell. "Kill me then," he gasped. "Go ahead and do it. I don't want to kill you. I want you to leave us alone." "I can't. Don't you understand?" Wickham's voice cracked. "If I back down now, if I let you humiliate me like this, I'm finished. The council will have my head. The town will lose all respect for me. I'll be nothing. You think your pride is worth dying for? I think I'm already dead either way." There was real desperation in Wickham's voice now. "You think those men will follow me after this? You think the town will listen to a mayor who got beaten by a hermit in front of witnesses? I'm ruined whether you kill me or not." Caleb's grip loosened slightly. "Then leave. Start over somewhere else, like Lila has to. There are other towns, other lives you could live." For a moment, Wickham sagged, the fight draining out of him. Then his hand moved, not toward Caleb, but to his coat. He pulled out a small pistol, the kind gamblers carried for emergencies. "If I'm finished, I'm taking you with me," he snarled and pulled the trigger. The shot was muffled by the layers of clothing, but Lila saw Caleb jerk, saw him stumble back. Blood bloomed across his side, stark red against the white snow. "No!" The scream tore from her throat as she burst from the cabin, her pistol raised. She fired without thinking, without aiming, pure instinct and terror guiding her hand. The bullet caught Wickham in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his pistol, clutching at the wound with a look of shocked disbelief. The remaining men moved then, not to attack but to grab their fallen leader. Samuel reached him first, supporting his weight. "We need to get him to a doctor. This is over, Ward. This is over." "Take him," Caleb said through gritted teeth, one hand pressed against his bleeding side. "Take him and go. And if I ever see any of you on this mountain again, I won't be so generous." They didn't need to be told twice. Within minutes, they had Wickham on a horse and were riding hard for Raven Hollow, leaving the wounded and the dead behind them. Lila reached Caleb just as his legs gave out. She caught him as well as she could, easing him down to the snow. "You idiot! You beautiful, brave, stupid idiot!" "Language," Caleb murmured, but there was a ghost of a smile on his pale lips. "Not very ladylike." "Shut up. Save your strength." Her hands were shaking as she tried to examine the wound. Blood soaked his shirt, too much blood. "We need to get you inside." "In a minute. Just need to catch my breath." "Now, Caleb, get up now or I swear I'll drag you." He laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. "You would too, wouldn't you?" "Try me." With her help, he managed to stand, leaning heavily on her shoulder. They staggered toward the cabin together, leaving a trail of blood drops in the snow behind them. Inside, Lila eased him down onto the bed. The same bed he'd given her that first night, the same bed where she'd healed from her own near death. She stripped away his coat and shirt, her breath catching at the wound. The bullet had torn through his side, just above his hip. It was bleeding heavily, but the placement looked like it might have missed vital organs. Might. She had no way to be sure. "Tell me what to do," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Tell me how to fix this." Caleb's eyes were already starting to glaze with pain and shock, but he focused on her face. "Whiskey. On the shelf. Clean the wound. There's a sewing kit in the drawer. You'll need to stitch it." "I don't know how to stitch a wound." "Same as sewing a pelt, just smaller stitches." His hand found hers, gripped it weakly. "You can do this, Lila. I trust you." She wanted to scream that she couldn't, that this was too much, that she was going to kill him through her own incompetence. But she looked at his face, at the man who'd saved her, taught her, loved her, and found strength she didn't know she possessed. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I can do this." The next hours were a nightmare of blood and pain. Lila cleaned the wound with whiskey, making Caleb bite down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. She stitched it closed with trembling hands, her vision blurred by tears, while he shook and gasped beneath her. She bandaged it with clean cloth, changed it when it soaked through, changed it again. Night fell. Caleb's fever spiked. He thrashed and muttered, calling for Anna, then for Lila, his mind lost somewhere between past and present. Lila sat beside him through it all, bathing his face with cool water, spooning willow bark tea between his cracked lips, praying to any force that might be listening. "Don't you dare die," she told him fiercely, when his breathing grew too shallow. "Don't you dare leave me alone up here after everything we've been through. You promised me we'd face things together. You don't get to break that promise." She talked to him through the endless night, telling him about the life she imagined they could have, about a cabin they'd build together in a valley where the spring came early and the winters were less harsh, about children, maybe, if he wanted them, about growing old together and teaching grandchildren how to read the mountain signs. "We'll have chickens," she whispered, holding his burning hand, "and a garden, real vegetables, not just what we can forage, maybe a cow for milk, and dogs. We'll need dogs to warn us if anyone comes up the trail. You can teach me to make furniture like you did before. We'll sell it in whichever town will have us. We'll build a real life, Caleb, a good life. But you have to stay with me. You have to fight." Sometime near dawn, his fever broke. Lila woke from an exhausted doze to find his eyes open and clear, watching her. "You stayed," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Of course I stayed, you fool. Where else would I go? You shot Wickham, for me. I'd shoot anyone who tried to hurt you." She brushed the sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." But there was warmth in his eyes. "You saved my life. You've saved mine so many times. I figured I owed you one." He tried to sit up and groaned. Lila pushed him gently back down. "Don't even think about it. You're staying in that bed until I say otherwise." "Bossy," he murmured, but he was smiling. "Someone has to be, since you clearly have no sense of self-preservation." Her voice cracked. "You could have died, Caleb. When I saw him shoot you, I thought, I know." His hand found hers. "I'm sorry I scared you. But it's over now." Wickham's wounded and humiliated. His men scattered. They won't be back. How can you be sure? Because they finally understand what I've been trying to tell them all along. The mountain belongs to those strong enough to claim it, and we're stronger than they ever were. Over the following days, Caleb healed slowly. The wound showed no signs of infection. Lila's desperate stitching had apparently been good enough. She tended him with fierce devotion, refusing to let him do anything but rest and eat and slowly regain his strength. On the 4th day, he was able to sit up without feeling dizzy. On the 7th, he could stand and walk a few steps. By the 2nd week, he was chafing at being confined to bed rest. I need to check the trap lines, he argued as Lila pressed him back down for the 3rd time that morning. The traps can wait. You're still healing. The cabin needs repairs from the bullet holes. I've already patched them. Not as pretty as you would have done it, but they keep the wind out. Lila? No. She stood over him, hands on her hips. You told me once that I needed to prove I wasn't fragile. Well, I'm proving it. I'm strong enough to take care of both of us while you heal. So lie there, drink your tea, and let me do what needs doing. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, then started to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that made him wince and clutch his side. When did you get so fierce? You taught me, Lila said simply. You showed me I didn't have to be what everyone else said I was, that I could be strong and capable and worthy, so that's what I'm being. Something in his expression softened. Come here. She sat on the edge of the bed, and he pulled her down beside him, careful of his injury. They lay there together, his arm around her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. When spring comes, Caleb said quietly, we'll leave this mountain. Find a place where no one knows our names or our history. Start fresh. I thought you loved this mountain. I did. I do. But it's Anna's mountain now. Her grave is out there and her memory in every tree and rock. He paused. I'll always carry her with me. But I don't need to live in her shadow anymore. You've shown me that I can have a future, not just a past. Lila tilted her head to look at him. What if I want to stay? What if I've come to love this mountain too? Do you? She considered the question seriously. I love the life we've built here. I love the cabin and the quiet and the way the world makes sense. But mostly I love being with you, so wherever you want to go, that's where I want to be. Caleb kissed the top of her head. Then we'll go together. Find our own place. Build our own life. He tightened his arm around her. Thank you, Lila. For saving me, for staying, for giving me a reason to want more than just survival. Thank you for seeing me, she whispered back, for seeing past what I looked like, or what other people said about me, for seeing who I really was underneath. They stayed like that as the winter sun climbed higher in the sky, two people who'd been broken and discarded finding wholeness in each other, finding in each other something worth fighting for, worth living for, worth becoming better for. The weeks that followed passed in a rhythm of healing and quiet domesticity that neither of them had expected to find. Caleb's strength returned gradually, measured in the increasing distance he could walk without needing to rest, in the steadiness returning to his hands as he worked on small repairs around the cabin. Lila watched over him with a fierce protectiveness that made him smile, even as he chafed against her restrictions. I'm not made of glass, he protested one morning when she insisted he sit while she brought in the firewood. No, you're made of stubborn pride and poor judgment, Lila replied, dropping an armload of logs beside the hearth. Which is why someone needs to make sure you don't tear those stitches open trying to prove how tough you are. The stitches are fine. You did good work. I did desperate work. There's a difference. She brushed bark from her sleeves and moved to check the stew she had simmering over the fire. Besides, I like taking care of you. It makes me feel useful. Caleb stood, carefully, but without the grimace of pain that had marked his movements for the first 2 weeks. He crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You've always been useful, even when you didn't believe it yourself. Lila leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. Through the window, she could see snow still blanketing the world in white, but there was something different in the quality of the light. Something that spoke of change coming, of seasons turning. How much longer before the pass is clear, she asked. 6 weeks? Maybe 8? Depends on how warm it gets, how fast the snow melts. His arms tightened around her. Are you anxious to leave? Yes and no. Lila turned in his embrace to face him. I want to see what's beyond this mountain. I want to start the life we talked about. But I'm also scared. What if we can't find a place that will take us? What if word has spread from Raven Hollow about what happened? Then we keep moving until we find somewhere that doesn't care about rumors from a town nobody's heard of. Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. The world's bigger than you think, Lila. There are places where people mind their own business, where your past doesn't matter as much as your willingness to work hard and deal honestly. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Before Lila could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Not the wind, not an animal. Hoofbeats, approaching slowly up the trail. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. Get back from the window. Maybe doesn't matter. Get back. Lila obeyed, her heart pounding as Caleb positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. They waited in tense silence as the hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped just outside. A voice called out, hesitant and distinctly non-threatening. Mr. Ward, it's Martin Coyle. I'm alone and unarmed. I just want to talk. Caleb and Lila exchanged glances. Deputy Coyle, the man who'd tried to stop the first attack, who'd ridden away when things turned violent. What was he doing here? Keep your hands where I can see them and step into view, Caleb called back. The door opened slowly and Coyle appeared, his hands raised, his expression wary but not hostile. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since Lila had last seen him, new lines etched around his eyes, his face gaunt with stress. I'm alone, he repeated. I swear it. I just need 5 minutes of your time. Caleb kept the rifle trained on him, but nodded. Talk fast. Coyle stepped fully into the cabin, carefully not making any sudden movements. His eyes found Lila and softened with something that might have been regret. Miss Morton, I'm glad to see you're alive and well. What do you want, Coyle? Caleb's voice was flat and dangerous. To tell you what's happened in Raven Hollow since that day on the mountain. Coyle shifted uncomfortably. And to bring you something from the town council. I don't want anything from that town. Just hear me out, please. When Caleb didn't shoot him, Coyle took that as permission to continue. Wickham made it back to town, but his wound got infected on the ride down. By the time the doctor saw him, there wasn't much to be done. He died 3 days later, raving about demons in the mountains and curses on anyone who challenged them. Lila felt something twist in her chest. She'd shot a man. He was dead because of her. Even though he'd been trying to kill Caleb, even though he'd given her no choice, the weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. Caleb's expression didn't change. That's tragic. Now leave. There's more. Coyle pulled a folded paper from his coat. The town held an emergency meeting after Wickham died. A lot of people were angry about what happened, angry that he'd led men up that mountain to die over a grudge, angry that he'd wasted town resources, angry that he'd lied about the grain being valuable when everyone knew it was spoiled. He lied? Lila asked, finding her voice. The grain you were accused of stealing? Thomas Wells admitted at the meeting that Wickham ordered him to scatter it near your door, to frame you. Coyle's voice was heavy with shame. Wickham wanted you gone because you reminded him of his daughter. She was heavy like you, and she ran off 2 years ago after he beat her for embarrassing him at a social. When you showed up in town, needing help, needing kindness, it ate at him, made him think about what he'd done to his own child. The revelation hit Lila like a physical blow. All of it, the accusation, the humiliation, the near death in the town square, had been because she reminded a bitter man of his failures as a father. Because her mere existence was an uncomfortable mirror. So the council decided to make it right, Coyle continued. He held out the paper. This is an official pardon. Full exoneration of all charges. Your name is cleared, Miss Morton. You're free to return to Raven Hollow if you choose. And the council has voted to pay you compensation, $50 for the injustice done to you. $50. The same amount Wickham had offered as a bounty for her capture. The irony wasn't lost on Lila. Caleb took the paper, read it carefully, then handed it to Lila. She's already free. Has been since the moment I cut her loose from that chair. Your paper doesn't change anything. Maybe not for you, but it might matter to her. Coyle looked at Lila directly. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I stood by while they hurt you. I let it happen. But for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry. A lot of people in town are sorry. We let fear and anger turn us into something ugly. Sorry doesn't give me back the life I lost, Lila said quietly. It doesn't erase the cold or the fear or the certainty that I was going to die alone and hated. No, Coyle agreed. It doesn't. But maybe it's a start. Maybe it means the next person who needs help won't face what you faced. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Samuel Brennan left town, by the way. Couldn't face the shame of what he'd done. Last I heard, he was working in a logging camp 3 territories over. And Mrs. Henderson closed her store and moved in with her sister in Pennsylvania. A lot of people couldn't live with what happened once they really thought about it. After Coyle left, silence filled the cabin. Lila stared at the pardon in her hands, this official piece of paper that said she'd been wronged, that she'd been innocent all along. Part of her had always known it, but seeing it acknowledged in writing felt surreal. What are you thinking? Caleb asked gently. I'm thinking about all the ways that piece of paper would have mattered a few months ago. How desperate I was for anyone in that town to believe me, to see me as something other than a burden. She looked up at him. And I'm thinking about how none of it matters anymore. They can pardon me, compensate me, apologize until they're blue in the face. It doesn't change the fact that when I needed them most, they chose cruelty over compassion. So you don't want to go back? I never want to see that town again. The certainty in her voice surprised even her. Whatever we build, wherever we go, it won't be anywhere near Raven Hollow. Caleb smiled, something warm and proud in his expression. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. The compensation money, delivered by Coyle along with the pardon, became the foundation of their planning. Combined with the pelts Caleb had stockpiled over the winter, they had enough resources to make a real start somewhere new. On the nights when the wind howled and the fire burned low, they would sit together and dream out loud. Caleb had heard of settlements in the Oregon Territory where land was cheap and people asked fewer questions about where you came from. Lila suggested California, where the gold rush had created boom towns full of strangers all reinventing themselves. They debated the merits of staying in the mountains versus trying life near the coast, of farming versus continuing to trap, of building a small trading post versus finding work in an established town. What if we can't agree? Lila asked one night, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder as they watched the fire. Then we'll compromise. Or we'll try one thing, and if it doesn't work, we'll try another. He pressed a kiss to her hair. The point isn't having a perfect plan. It's having each other while we figure it out. As winter slowly loosened its grip on the mountain, Caleb began teaching Lila the skills she'd need for whatever life they chose. He showed her how to bargain for supplies without getting cheated, how to judge the quality of tools and fabrics and livestock. He taught her basic carpentry so she could help build whatever structure they'd need. He even worked with her on reading and writing, using Anna's old poetry book and scraps of paper to help her improve beyond the basics her mother had taught her. Why is this so important to you? Lila asked one afternoon, frustrated with her clumsy attempts to write a full sentence. Because knowledge is freedom, Caleb replied. The more you know, the less you depend on other people to tell you what's true or fair or right. Nobody can take advantage of someone who knows how to read a contract, count money, and understand their own worth. She practiced until her hand cramped, until the letters stopped looking like the scratches of a drunken chicken and started resembling actual words. And when she finally wrote out a full sentence, I am not a burden, I am worthy of love and respect, Caleb took the paper and carefully folded it into his pocket. I'm keeping this, he said, to remind me why we're doing all of this. The first real signs of spring came in mid-March. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. Streams that had been frozen solid roared to life, swollen with runoff. Birds returned, filling the mornings with song. The world was waking up, and with it came the knowledge that their time on the mountain was ending. They began packing in early April. Caleb had 2 horses now, his own and one he'd purchased from a passing trapper who'd stopped by to trade. They loaded the animals with supplies, pelts, tools, and the few possessions they couldn't bear to leave behind. Leela watched as Caleb carefully wrapped Anna's poetry book in oilcloth and tucked it into his saddlebag. "You don't have to bring that for my sake," she said quietly. "I'm not. I'm bringing it because it's part of who I was, and I don't want to forget that person completely. He made mistakes, had regrets, but he also loved deeply and survived more than he thought possible." Caleb looked at her. "Anna would have liked you, I think. Would have been glad I found someone who brought me back to life. I'd like to visit her grave before we go, to pay my respects." Caleb's expression softened. "I'd like that too." They made the pilgrimage on their last full day on the mountain. Anna's grave was marked by a simple wooden cross Caleb had carved, weathered now by 7 years of sun and snow and wind. He'd chosen a spot on a rise that overlooked a valley where wildflowers bloomed in summer, where the view stretched for miles. Lila stood back while Caleb knelt at the grave, his hand resting on the earth as if he could still touch the woman buried beneath. She couldn't hear what he said, but she saw his lips moving, saw the tension in his shoulders, saw the moment when something in him finally let go. When he stood and turned to her, his eyes were wet, but his expression was peaceful. "I told her about you, about us, about the life we're going to build." He held out his hand. "She'd want me to be happy. She'd want both of us to be happy." Lila took his hand and let him guide her to the grave. She knelt and placed her own hand on the cool earth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving him, for making him the kind of man who could save someone like me. I promise I'll take care of him. I promise I'll make sure your love wasn't wasted." The wind picked up, rustling through the new grass, and Lila chose to believe it was Anna's way of answering. A benediction, a blessing on what came next. They left the mountain at dawn the next morning, the rising sun painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. Lila looked back only once, seeing the cabin growing smaller in the distance, seeing the place where she'd learned to be strong, to be loved, to be free. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, guiding his horse alongside hers. "Only that we can't take the mountain with us. We're taking the important parts. The lessons, the strength, the knowledge that we survived something that should have broken us." He smiled at her, and in the morning light he looked younger, lighter, like a man who'd finally set down a burden he'd been carrying for too long. "Everything else is just scenery." They rode west, away from Raven Hollow, away from the past. The journey took 3 weeks, traveling slowly to spare the horses, camping under stars that seemed impossibly bright after months confined to the cabin. They passed through small settlements where people barely looked at them, through forests that had never known Caleb's footsteps, across rivers that ran clear and cold with snowmelt. And with each mile, Lila felt the last chains of her old life falling away. She wasn't the unwanted girl from Raven Hollow anymore. She wasn't the burden, the thief, the outcast. She was simply Lila, a woman strong enough to survive winter on a mountain, brave enough to shoot a man to save the person she loved, capable enough to build a new life from nothing. They found their place in a valley at the edge of the Oregon Territory, where a small settlement was just beginning to take shape. The land office had parcels available for those willing to work them, and the town, if you could call 3 buildings and a dozen tents a town, was too new and raw to care about anyone's history. The man at the land office barely looked up when they registered for their claim. Names: "Caleb and Lila Ward," Caleb said, his hand finding Lila's. She squeezed it, her heart swelling at hearing herself given his name, at the simple claim it represented. Husband and wife. They weren't, not officially, hadn't had time to find a preacher or make it legal, but the label felt right in a way that transcended paperwork. They were bound by something deeper than documents, by survival, by choice, by love that had been forged in the crucible of a mountain winter. The land office clerk just nodded and wrote it down. "Parcel 47 is available. 160 acres, decent soil, creek runs through the southern edge. $5 for the filing fee, then you've got 3 years to prove it up. Build a structure, cultivate the land, and it's yours free and clear." They paid the fee with some of their compensation money and rode out to see their future. The land was beautiful, rolling meadows bordered by forest, the promised creek running clear and swift, mountains visible in the distance but not looming overhead. It was wild but not harsh, remote but not isolated. It was possibility made manifest. "We'll build here,"
Caleb said, pointing to a rise that would catch the morning sun. Main cabin first, then maybe a barn if we decide to keep animals. Workshop for furniture making if we can afford the tools. Garden there, Lila added, already seeing it in her mind. And we'll need a root cellar for storage, and maybe... She laughed at herself. Listen to me. Planning like I know what I'm doing. You do know what you're doing. You learned from the best. Caleb grinned at her, then grew serious. Are you sure about this, Lila? It's going to be hard work. Long days, setbacks, failures before we get it right. I've never been more sure of anything. She turned to face him fully.
I spent my whole life being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of taking up space or having dreams. But you showed me different. You showed me I could survive anything, do anything, become anything I chose to become. So yes, I'm sure. I want this life. I want to build it with you. He kissed her then, deep and slow, a promise and a claiming and a celebration all at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lila saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. Then let's get started, he said. The first month was brutal. They lived in a tent while building the cabin, working from dawn until they couldn't see to swing a hammer anymore. Caleb's wound, though healed, still bothered him when he overextended, so Lila learned to do the heavy lifting, to climb and carry and build alongside him. Her hands blistered and her muscles screamed, but she welcomed the pain. It was the pain of creation, of making something lasting from raw materials and stubborn will. Other settlers began arriving as word spread about available land. The Johnsons, a young couple from Ohio who'd lost their farm to debt. The Chen family, who'd come from California seeking quieter opportunities. Old Samuel Greaves, a widower looking to spend his final years in peace. Martha Redding, a freed slave who'd saved every penny to buy her own land where no one could take her freedom again. They helped each other with the heavy work, raising walls, clearing fields, digging wells, and in the process, they became a community. Not like Raven Hollow, where everyone knew everyone's business and judgment flowed as freely as water. This was different. People here understood that everyone was running from something or towards something, and they respected the unspoken agreement not to pry too deeply into what came before. The Ward's cabin took shape over 6 weeks. It was smaller than Caleb's mountain cabin had been, but sturdier, built to last generations. They had real windows with glass Caleb had traded pelts for, a proper stone hearth, a wooden floor instead of packed earth. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, every log cut and fitted by their own hands, every nail driven with purpose. The night they moved in, they lay on blankets on the floor because they hadn't built furniture yet, and looked up at the ceiling they'd constructed together. We did it, Lila said, wonder in her voice. We actually did it. We did, Caleb agreed. Built ourselves a home, built ourselves a future. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to show up and tell us we're not allowed to have this. Caleb rolled onto his side to face her. Nobody's coming. Nobody gets to take this from us. We earned this, Lila. Every splinter and callus and aching muscle. This is ours. She turned to meet his eyes, seeing in them all the promise of the life stretching ahead of them. Make love to me, she whispered. In our home. In the life we built. He did, tender and passionate and achingly sweet, and afterward they lay tangled together on their blankets while the moon rose outside their windows and the future waited for them with open arms. Spring turned to summer. Their garden flourished. Lila had a gift for growing things, it turned out, her hands as skilled with seeds as they'd become with tools. The other settlers began coming to her for advice, and she found herself teaching Martha and Mrs. Johnson about companion planting and natural pest control, sharing knowledge that a few months ago she wouldn't have believed she possessed. Caleb set up his workshop and began taking commissions for furniture. Word spread about the quality of his work, and soon people were traveling from established towns to order tables and chairs and cabinets. He taught Lila the trade, showing her how to see the grain in wood, how to work with it instead of against it. You're good at this, he said one afternoon, watching her sand a chair leg with careful attention. Better than I was when I started. I had a good teacher. She smiled at him, still amazed sometimes that this was her life now, working alongside a man who valued her skills, building furniture that would outlast them both, living in a place where she was respected for what she could do instead of judged for what she looked like. In August, Martha Redding organized a community gathering to celebrate the first harvest. Everyone brought what they could: fresh vegetables, bread, a pig that the Johnsons had slaughtered, wild berries the Chen children had gathered. They set up tables in the meadow between properties and shared food and stories and laughter as the sun set in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Lila found herself sitting between Martha and Mrs. Chen, talking about plans for a schoolhouse. They had enough children now to warrant it, and Martha could read and write well enough to teach. "You should help," Martha said. "You've been practicing your letters, haven't you? Could work with the younger ones while I handle the older." "I'm not qualified." "None of us are qualified for half of what we're doing out here," Mrs. Chen interjected with a laugh. "We're making it up as we go. That's the beauty of it. No one to tell us we're doing it wrong." Looking around at these people, her neighbors, her friends, her community, Lila felt something settle in her chest that she'd never experienced before. Belonging, real belonging, based not on tolerating her presence, but on valuing her contributions. Later, as she and Caleb walked home under a sky thick with stars, she told him about the schoolhouse conversation. "You should do it," he said immediately. "You're patient and kind, and you understand what it's like to struggle with learning because someone told you that you weren't smart enough." "What if I'm not good at it?" "Then you'll get better, same as you got better at everything else you thought you couldn't do." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands on her shoulders. "Lila, when I found you in that square, you couldn't imagine a future beyond the next frozen hour. Now look at you. You're planning to teach children. You're part of a community. You're building a legacy." "We're building it," she corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed and kissed her under the star-filled sky. The first snow came in November, but it was gentle compared to the mountain winters they'd survived. The community had prepared well: food stored, firewood stacked, livestock sheltered. They visited each other regularly, making sure no one was struggling or in need. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the ward's cabin, the largest in the settlement, for a simple celebration. They sang songs and told stories and shared modest gifts they'd made for each other. Lila gave Martha a scarf she'd knitted and received in return a book of poems that Martha had owned since childhood. "I know you've been working on your reading," Martha said quietly. "Thought you might enjoy this. We can read it together sometimes if you like. Discuss what the poets meant." Lila hugged her fiercely, overwhelmed by the casual kindness, by the acceptance, by the friendship that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine affection. That night, after everyone had left and she and Caleb were cleaning up, Lila stood at the window looking out at the snow-dusted landscape. "A year ago I was dying in a town square," she said softly, "alone and hated, and certain my life had been worthless." Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "And now?" "Now I have a home, a husband and everything but paperwork, friends who value me, skills I never knew I could learn, purpose." She leaned back against him. "Now I have a life I never dared dream about." "We should make it official," Caleb said suddenly. "The husband and wife part. There's a circuit preacher who comes through every few months. We could ask him to marry us properly next time he's here." Lila turned in his arms, her eyes bright. "You want to marry me? Officially?" "I've wanted to since the first morning I woke up and found you trying to chop firewood, even though your hands were still blistered from cleaning pelts." He smiled. "You were so determined to earn your keep, to prove you weren't a burden. I knew then that you were stronger than anything the world could throw at you. Knew I wanted to spend my life watching you prove it over and over." "Yes," Lila said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll marry you, in front of a preacher and the whole community. I'll stand up and claim you as mine, and let you claim me as yours, and we'll make it so official that even heaven will have to acknowledge it." They married in April, exactly 1 year after they'd first seen the land that became their home. The entire community turned out, along with settlers from neighboring valleys who'd heard about the wedding and wanted to celebrate with them. Martha stood up as Lila's witness, and old Samuel Greaves stood for Caleb. Lila wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Caleb had bought in town, with wildflowers in her hair that Mrs. Chen's daughters had gathered that morning. Caleb wore his best shirt and the same coat he'd wrapped around her that night in the town square, carefully cleaned and mended. The preacher was young and earnest, clearly moved by their obvious devotion to each other. When he asked if there were any objections, Martha Stage whispered, "Anyone objects, they answer to me," which drew laughs from everyone. "Do you, Caleb Ward, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Caleb said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. "I did from the moment I saw her refuse to break even when the world tried its hardest to break her. And do you, Lila Morton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Lila said, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "I did from the moment he showed me I was worth saving." The preacher smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Oregon, and by the grace of goodness itself, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ward." Caleb did, thoroughly and tenderly, while their community cheered and whistled and celebrated the union of two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of their separate pain. The celebration lasted well into the night. Someone had brought a fiddle, and they danced in the meadow under lantern light, their laughter echoing off the surrounding hills. Lila danced with Caleb, with old Samuel, with the Chen children who stepped on her toes and giggled. She danced until her feet hurt and her cheeks ached from smiling. "Happy?" Caleb asked during a rare quiet moment, both of them catching their breath at the edge of the festivities. "I didn't know I could be this happy," Lila admitted.
"I didn't know life could feel like this, safe and joyful and full of people who actually want me around." "Get used to it," Caleb said, pulling her close, "because I plan on making sure you feel this way for the next 50 years at least." "Only 50? Fine, 60. 70 if my back holds out." She laughed and kissed him, tasting joy and promise, and the sweet certainty of a future they'd earned through pain and perseverance and refusing to let the world's cruelty define them. The years that followed were good ones. Hard work, certainly. Life on the frontier never stopped being work, but good in the way that mattered. They built a real community, with a schoolhouse that Lila helped run, a trading post that Caleb's furniture helped stock, families that grew and prospered and supported each other through whatever challenges arose. Lila never forgot where she'd come from, never forgot the cold of that chair in the town square, the conviction that she would die unloved and unmourned. But she also never let that memory define her. It was part of her story, but not the end of it, just the beginning of the journey that led her to strength, to love, to a life of dignity and purpose. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb took her back to the spot where they'd first stood and looked at their land. So much had changed. Where once there'd been only wild grass, now there were cultivated fields, a sturdy house, a workshop, a barn. Where there'd been only possibility, now there was reality, solid and lasting. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question from their first day on the mountain trail. Lila looked at the life they'd built, at the community they'd helped create, at the man who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She thought about the school children who called her Mrs. Ward with respect and affection, about the furniture orders that kept coming because Caleb's reputation for quality work had spread for hundreds of miles, about the garden that produced more than they could eat so they could share with neighbors in need. She thought about the girl she'd been, scared and worthless in her own eyes, dependent on the charity of people who resented her existence. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong and capable and valued, not despite her past, but because she'd survived it and chosen to become something more. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not a single one. This life, this love, this future, it's everything I never knew I deserved. Everything I fought for without even knowing I was fighting." Caleb pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun set over the valley they'd claimed as their own. Two people who'd been broken and discarded, finding in each other the strength to not just survive, but to truly live. The mountain of their beginning was hundreds of miles behind them, but its lessons remained, that survival required strength, that love required courage, and that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the harshest circumstances. They'd built a home, yes,
But more than that, they'd built lives worth living together, in defiance of everyone who'd ever said they weren't worthy of happiness. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.